I want to talk now a little bit about the emergence of stone tools we're talking here about human biological evolution, but this takes us into the archaeological record as well. The people who will later find are looking for artifacts and human-made stuff. And what this tells us, we talked about how chimpanzees used tools and termite fishing sticks and other things. And it's certain that humans or early hominins were probably using non-durable tools, stuff that would disappear into the organic record. But with stone tools, we get stuff that sticks around. And the earliest sort of undisputed stone tools date to about 2.5 million years ago. So you'd have these durable things that people were making with stone that then people, as I talked about, we began to become fundamental to human life and to human existence. So what this means is that learned behavior, being able to make a tool, use a tool, then incorporate that into your life and pass that along, becomes extremely important to surviving. Coupling that with the mobility of bipedalism, you get a durable package of behaviors that is starting to develop in tandem and is allowing these creatures to do things that they may not have been able to do before. And so we talked about how all creatures are involved in transforming their environments, the idea of niche construction, which can happen inadvertently. Every time we breathe, we change the environment around us by introducing more CO2 into the air. But we can actually also think about how people start to think about changing their environments and how these tools can allow people to do things that they may not have been able to before. And so this brings up the idea that once you start incorporating tools and culture into human life, and then that might change the selective pressures in the next generation, or maybe relieve the selective pressures so that different kinds of abilities are favored than may have been favored simply from what we might call natural selection. One of the enduring questions is, who is making these tools? Who is using the tools? It's very difficult from archaeological evidence, and this applies to more than tools. It can apply to things like pottery as well, to know who and how and where it is being used. And so, especially when we're thinking about, some people say that they have found there's been some really intriguing finds in the last few years where people talk about tools, stone tools, about 3 or 3.3 million years ago, so even earlier. But other people argue that those are not really stone tools, that they're incidentally found, or some people have observed different ape species or monkeys banging stones together kind of randomly, and then it looks like there might be something tool-like there, but they seem to just been having fun. So sometimes it's very difficult to tell. And as we'll talk about on Tuesday, there are a number of different species of different cranial sizes that seem to be able to use and manipulate stone tools. So some of these we always used to associate the early stone tools. We said, well, that must mean that we have cranium expansion. That must mean that they are bipedal. And we're not as sure about that anymore. The other thing is, there's often, when we think back into the past and when we project back into the past and I say stone tools, we probably imagine this as some burly man there, kind of like that man hunting the antelope there. When we look at the contemporary ethnographic evidence, that is the stuff that anthropologists look at in contemporary societies, we see that in some societies, there are actually many women who are making and using stone tools, especially to scrape hides. Now, I'm not trying to say that it was women who were making the stone tools all the way back. That's also a projection into history. But it's interesting, I think, to reorient ourselves to help us think about a lot of the things that sometimes we ascribe to one gender or to another gender. We should be careful about projecting that back into the past. Like I said, if you look at societies today that have stone tools, there are oftentimes women who are the ones who are making and using those tools. So we have to be very cautious about projecting our own ideas onto the past about who was doing what back then. After the Australopiths, they start to kind of fade out, or in some ways they are still around, when we start to see evidence of another, in some ways, quite familiar looking creature. Because what we have here are some taller skeletons that look more like what we imagine, more like modern humans. So these are typed, they were originally called Homo erectus. And they were called Homo erectus because they were thought to be the first upright skeletons, Homo erectus, the first upright skeletons. We've now figured out that that is not true, but the name has kind of stuck around, obviously, all this time. So these were not the first bipedal creatures by a long shot, but that's how they got their name in the record as such, and we've kept it. What we see among the Homo erectus finds is something that for all this time we've been seeing a lot of with the Australopiths, of an ape-like crania, maybe some cranium expansion, maybe some larger brains, but it wasn't very clear. But with Homo erectus, we do get a pretty large increase in brain size. We get, as we just saw a little bit of, we get evidence that Homo erectus is not only able to do endurance walking, but also able to do endurance running. And as I mentioned, humans are unique in that we can run long distances. So almost many mammals can outsprint humans. We're not that good at running fast in comparison to other creatures. But in terms of running over long distances, a fit human, if you're in good shape, you can try it out someday. When you see a deer, you just start running along behind it, and eventually, if you're in good shape, the deer will collapse before you do. So this is, it's an interesting idea about perhaps an advantage for bipedalism, how some of these Homo erectus types were able to hunt. It made wonderful sense to me. I grew up in Montana, and there was a person there who during hunting season, that's what he did. He would find the tracks of a deer and run it down. Took a while, and most of the rest of the people there were doing the whole hunting while drinking beer kind of thing. But if you're a fit hunter, you can actually do this. Now, there is some other evidence here as well. So this idea is extremely compelling. And for those people who are into hunting, you'll find that there are a lot of people attached to the idea of hunting throughout hominin and Homo erectus and Homo sapien history. But there's some evidence that seems to contradict these ideas. One of them is that in contemporary hunter and gatherer societies, like the one you just saw, most of the time what they are eating are tubers and roots and various plant-based food, which usually accounts for about 70% of the calories. So we'll talk about that when we talk more about hunting and gathering as a subsistence strategy. And I also knew there's an anthropologist who wanted to study among the San and in the Kalahari And she got really into running because she thought they were going to be running all the time and running down their prey. When she got there, they were like, no, we don't want to do that because that just makes the meat taste bad. So we prefer to hunt this other way. So like I said, it's an interesting idea, and it may have some serious, obviously it corresponds well with what humans are capable of, but I don't want to get too completely attached to it. Homo erectus seems to have been able to at least use fire, to be able to control fire is very debatable. So one anthropologist, Richard Wrangham, has very famously stated that cooking was the thing that made us human. And his contention is that with Homo erectus, one of the things you need to support these large-brained creatures is to be able to have some form of cooking and processed food. And so he argues for cooking as early as 1.8, 1.9, 2 million years ago. Other people are less convinced, although it seems like they are able to use fire perhaps in the landscape or in the environment or as a source of light. So it's again, hard to say exactly. There's contradictory evidence here, but it's possible that there was use of fire and perhaps even cooking in this earlier time. What is most important for us, though, is that, like I said, all the evolution that is, all the cool things in terms of bipedalism and stone tools and all that good stuff going back to 2 million years ago happens in Africa, in Southern Africa, Eastern Africa, Western Africa. That's where all the evolutionary stuff happens in the early stages of hominin evolution. But with Homo erectus, it is the first hominin species, or the first bipedal hominoid, first bipedal creature to expand out from Africa. And we want to be clear that that doesn't mean that everybody left Africa. There's still evolution going on within Africa, but we have an expanded range of Homo erectus through what is called, we talked about this, the Old World. So we find Homo erectus in what is now China, maybe even in what is now Indonesia. Some archaeological evidence, but not very good skeletons in what is Europe. So basically, it's probable that there was an expansion out of Africa through what is now the Middle East, and eventually making their way over into what is now the east part of Asia. So this is a very significant expansion, and it's happening. Some of these early finds are at about 1.8, 1.9 million years ago of the expansions of Homo erectus lineages. And what has always been an enduring puzzle, and it's what we will be talking about in the next class, is what happens to these lineages as they expand from Africa. How do those lineages then basically stay in those places and evolve in those places? What happens to a group that you probably have heard of, the Neandertals, very famous group of Homo species, basically in Europe, or a more recent find, supported mostly by genetic evidence, the Denisovans, named for Denisova cave in Siberia, or another find, which is discussed a little bit here, is Homo naledi. So what is the relationship between Homo erectus as they expanded and the later lineages, and how do we get to Homo sapiens from all this bipedal diversity? So that will be the topic of the second part of this chapter, is what happens to these Homo erectus lineages after this first expansion from Africa, and how we get from this bipedal diversity to end up with only one interbreeding species of Homo sapiens across this entire range.